to this day, the government has not confirmed the names of the men that have been in Guantanamo. So how did we find out about who these people were? We connected with organizations around the globe that were very much like this gathering. People of conscience, people who were very concerned about what was happening. We connected with human rights organizations on the ground, and we began to piece together with other groups, Amnesty International, with Human Rights Watch. We began to piece together what has happened to some of these folks. People would say, my husband disappeared, I haven't seen him in 2 years. Somebody says, yes, I saw him, he was in the custody of the Americans. They would check, he's not in Bagram Air Force Base. And we began to figure out that some of these men were being dumped in Guantanamo. So what we had to do as lawyers, you can't represent people without permission. So the question is, how do you get permission to represent somebody that the government won't confirm is actually in jail, and you don't really know what their name is? So what we did was we got what are called next friend authorizations. We connected with the family members, right? Now this is during the time that the U.S. Has invaded Iraq, has invaded Afghanistan. The entire world knows something that George Bush wouldn't admit, which was that this is essentially an illegal war that is terrorizing the people in these countries as much as it's aimed at its leaders. And so we were successful as a group of NGOs, human rights groups, to be able to win the trust of the families to say, yes, there are Americans and there are Americans and there are Americans, but not all Americans are like George Bush. We think this thing stinks too. If you help us, give us permission, we can find out at least where your son is. We might be able to represent him in a court of law. So we were able to piece together these authorizations from family members, from other folks, but it was from 2002 until the decision in 2004, no civilian had been down to Guantanamo with respect to the base, but we had been representing those folks for 2 years. When the Supreme Court issued its great decision in Rasul versus Bush, it was a tremendous win. And actually what happened was that a whole range of legal organizations and law firms came and realized, oh my goodness, that these crazy guys from the Center for Constitutional Rights might be onto something. And so we've actually now pulled together a group of 500 pro bono lawyers to do the work for representing the men in Guantanamo. In itself is, and as people of conscience, you'll sort of get this. You have these, these are white shoe corporate law types, and I think lawyers have hearts at some place. It's not always easy to find out where they are. But these guys started out realizing what we know in our daily lives is that you have to push for the impossible. You have to push for the goal that you're looking for in order to make anything possible. And we pushed a lot, and we got a little. And these guys came on board, and now you have these law firms. And I don't even know if these guys are going to be able to stay in law firms after this, because they've been absolutely radicalized and scandalized and outraged by what the U.S. government has done. But more importantly, I think they are very proud of what they have done in the face of this work. As I know that you all are. Very proud of taking a stand when all around you was like, well, I don't know, torture, these guys are bad. But taking the absolute position that there can never be, we cannot live in a society where people are just thrown in the gulag and you forget about them. We can't live in a society where there is a patch on the earth anywhere where no law reaches. And we can't live in a society ever where it's okay to torture other human beings. You just can't do that. And that is what motivates us at the center. I know that that's what motivates you all. And so this discussion that we're having and we're going to have tonight is very energizing. And I must tell you that the folks at the center work very, very hard, day in and day out. But it is discussions and connections with people around the world, people around the country that are doing the work with us that is incredibly heartening and keeps us moving forward. So I want to thank you for that. As we move towards the Obama world, what have we learned from George Bush? Well, we've learned a couple of things. We've learned that George Bush has expanded the role of the executive, the power of the presidency, beyond any president in the history of this country. But we also know that there's never been a president who has voluntarily relinquished the powers that the previous president gave him. So where does that leave Barack Obama? Barack Obama came into office with more power on his first day than George Bush had on his first day. And he is in this untenable, but I think clearly defined position, where in order for him to live up to the direction that he's trying to point us in order for him to keep true to his promise to take America in a new direction, part and parcel of that is he's going to have to realize that while some of us may be very happy that he's the president, and some of us may actually believe that he promises to use the powers of the presidency for good and not for evil, the problem that we have is that the presidency is now outside of the constitutional lines. It used to be, right? It used to be that the power of the executive was actually the weakest branch of government. You remember that? And now, between the time that George Bush took office and now, kids that were in junior high school are now in their junior year in college, and they have taken this entire period of time thinking, well, the president must be the most powerful person in American government. It has turned everything on its head, and it is now in Barack Obama's hands. We are doing a project called The First 100 Days at the Center for Constitutional Rights. If you go to our website, you can see some of the information. And we've been monitoring what President Obama has been doing on a range of civil liberties issues, including warrantless wiretapping, Guantanamo, the War Powers Act, a whole range of things. And what we found is that on his third day in office, he issued the now famous executive orders. We were all very happy to see that. He said, I will close Guantanamo, I will close the secret CIA black sites. Guantanamo is going to be closed in a year. I also order that someone does an immediate review of Guantanamo to make sure that they comply with Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions, and we are going to close down this place. Well, that was the third day in office. 2 months later, Admiral Walsh, I believe his name was one of the people that was responsible for reviewing Guantanamo to figure out whether it was actually compliant with Article 3 of the Geneva Conventions, which, as most of you know, but some of you don't, Geneva Conventions is the international law, the covenant that the United States has signed on to that deals with the treatment of detainees. Just a general aside, from the bad old days, George Bush, of course, took the position that Article 3 did not apply to any of the men in Guantanamo, which, of course, cleared the way for the massive torture program. But the Supreme Court said that it did. So Admiral Walsh comes back with his report. And Admiral Walsh says, well, I've got good news for you, President Obama. Guantanamo is completely compliant with Article 3 of the Geneva Convention. Now, at the same time that he came out with this report, which of course was not released, the Center came out with its report. And it was based on the discussions that we had with our Guantanamo clients from January, the time that President Obama was sworn in, to late February, the time that this report came out. And our report was drastically different. And here's what we found. There are 240 men, roughly, that are left in Guantanamo. Most of the men, over 100, are actually from Yemen. All of the people, of the 779 people that were there before, the government released 500 on its own. Before we could even get a Supreme Court ruling, the government was letting these guys out the back door. And we know that most of the men are from Yemen. But the reason why they're still there is not because they're the worst of the worst. It's because George Bush and Yemen had a real problem. George Bush didn't trust that Yemen was going to be monitoring these men. Barack Obama comes in, and it's the same cats that are in charge of the CIA, and it's the same cats that are in charge of the military, and they're saying, well, we can't trust these Yemeni people either. So Obama has to do something about this. And so what we're urging him to do is to take a clean look at the men in Guantanamo, which he's doing. And we've also urged him to do something that George Bush wouldn't do, which would be to reach out diplomatically, not only to Europe, but also to the Middle East, because the way to solve this problem is by working with the governments on a solution and not pretending that the United States is the only kid in the playground and is not going to play with anybody else. So as a result, we've actually had more discussions with the Department of State and with the Justice Department in the last 3 months than we have in the entire previous 8 years, which is a very good sign. It's a very good sign.